I'd like on your behalf to thank the Prime Minister for a very important address and for all the support that he has given to our Assembly. I now have very great pleasure in welcoming to the Assembly Mr. Jens Stoltenberg, Secretary-General of NATO and Chairman of the North Atlantic Council. Mr. Stoltenberg, I'm delighted to welcome you to our annual session, your first as Secretary-General of NATO. I know that I speak for everyone here in appreciation of your clear commitment to NATO and its purpose. This is something which you consistently displayed while serving as Prime Minister, through your support and for the participation by Norwegian forces in NATO operations, and through your advocacy of better burden sharing with transatlantic allies. Many of us will remember your address to our Assembly in Oslo in May 2009, and it's a great pleasure that you're back with us today. May I also say how much I appreciated your early engagement with the Parliamentary Assembly since your appointment as Secretary-General and your visit to our offices in Brussels in September to discuss cooperation between NATO and the Assembly. I believe we've been able to establish a strong working relationship at the start of your term, and I very much hope that that will continue. We're of course grateful to you for setting aside 2 hours today to be with the Assembly and for agreeing to take questions. I need to tell colleagues before I call on the Secretary-General to assess the Assembly the procedure for asking questions. The Secretary-General of NATO, and indeed the other speakers we have today who were taking questions, will all take questions according to the same procedure. Because of the time constraints, I will announce questions in groups of 3 so that you'll be prepared. And anyone who wishes to ask a question to the Secretary-General is encouraged to let me know as soon as possible. Please raise your hand, and a member of staff from the Secretariat will take your name and bring it to me up here. There will be a 2-minute limit for all questions, which I will enforce ferociously. And I cannot, of course, guarantee that everybody who submits their name will be called, but the briefer that you make your questions, the more of you will be called. Thank you for that. Mr. Secretary-General, I'm very pleased to give you the floor.
President, distinguished members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, and my old friend and predecessor Jaap, it's a great honor to be here and to be able to address you all. And thank you for the kind welcome. It is really a great pleasure for me to address this assembly, because before I became Secretary-General of NATO, I was elected as a member of the Norwegian Parliament for more than 20 years. And during that period, I learned about the importance of parliamentary assemblies, and I understood that executive bodies, being it government or being it Secretary-Generals of NATO, have to stay in close contact and how to work with parliaments. And the experience of being a member of the Norwegian Parliament taught me the true value of parliaments, to hold governments to account, to ensure that taxpayers' money is well spent, and that the views of people are heard. This is my first opportunity to speak with you, but it will not be my last. I intend to meet with you regularly, to consult with you and to seek your ideas. This is important for me. Today, NATO needs you more than ever. We are working hard to turn the decisions we took at the Wales Summit into reality. On my first day in office, I outlined my 3 priorities: to keep NATO strong, strong as a political alliance and strong as a military alliance, to work with our partners to bring more stability to our neighborhood, and to keep the bond between North America and Europe rock solid. Each of these priorities requires financial resources underpinned by political will. For without them, there can be no security. And without security, there can be little else. No safety, no prosperity, no freedom. And the link you provide as NATO parliamentarians to the parliaments and the citizens of your countries are vital for NATO. And this is why I today would like to discuss with you a core issue: keeping the defense pledge that we made at the Wales summit. Because we all have to remember that with the end of the Cold War, the world changed and defense budgets were cut, as people rightly demanded a peace dividend. With no imminent territorial threat, this made sense. Later, with the financial crisis, the cuts became even deeper. We have gone from standing armies to smaller deployable forces, from a NATO command structure of 22,000 to less than 9,000, and from over 33,000 tanks to less than 7,000. We have also postponed new investments, reduced our exercises, and cut back on maintenance. I'm not going to argue that we need to return to where we were and have exactly the same forces, the same capabilities and structures as before. But once more, the world has changed. To our east, Russia is trying to replace the rule of law with the rule of force. To our south, we see violence and extremism across North Africa and the Middle East. And we continue to face other challenges, from missile proliferation to cyber attacks. So we must keep up to these changes. We must have more and better equipped armed forces, and we must have the right balance between forces and capabilities. So let me be clear. This is not just an exercise in accountancy. The stakes are high, the threats are real. So we must redouble our efforts to resource our alliance. The Readiness Action Plan we adopted at the Wales Summit is the most significant strengthening of our collective defense since the end of the Cold War. It will help us to deal with threats from wherever they come, from the east or from the south. So it's vital that we implement the plan on time, in full. A key part of this is the new Spearhead Force, a very high readiness force able to react quickly, with a command and control presence in the eastern part of our alliance, and a demanding new exercise program, so we can have the right forces in the right place at the right time. At Wales, we also decided to launch a new mission in Afghanistan to train, advise, and assist the Afghan security forces from January. And I welcome that the Parliament in Afghanistan have ratified the legal agreements we need to implement the Resolute Support mission from the 1st of January. In Wales, we also decided to increase our support for our partners, such as Jordan and Georgia, to build their own defense capacity and project stability in our neighborhoods. All these efforts must be properly resourced, and our military needs long-term investment and political support, for readiness comes at a cost. If you look around the world, you see that while NATO has cut defense spending, others have rapidly increased it. Over the last 5 years, Russia has increased its spending by 50%, and it plans further increases. At the same time, total NATO defense spending fell by 20%. In more peaceful times, it was right to reduce defense spending, but we do not live in peaceful times. So now it's right to stop the cuts and to increase investment in our defense. This is not just about comparison to the rest of the world. It is also about the balance within NATO and within Europe. The GDP of the United States and that of Europe is almost exactly the same. Yet the United States spends more than twice as much on defense than all the other allies combined, providing over 2/3 of total defense spending by NATO allies. All allies are expected to shoulder their fair share of the burden, in terms of spending, in terms of capabilities, and in terms of contributing to our operations. So at our Wales summit, we agreed to invest in our collective defense and to have a more balanced sharing of cost and responsibilities. We made a joint pledge to stop the cuts, to increase spending in real terms as our economies improve, to move towards spending 2% of GDP on defense within a decade, to spend better, and to deliver the capabilities we need. We also agreed to review progress annually. We will start at the meeting of the defense ministers in June, and we will also place it on the agenda of future summits. But the Warsaw Summit 2016, we must show progress and a way forward to further improvement in the years ahead. So we need to make the best of the time we have. I know that increasing defense spending is not easy, but it is possible, step by step, and every step counts, starting now. The United States, the United Kingdom, Greece and Estonia are already meeting the 2% guideline. And I'm encouraged that a growing number of allies have outlined their intention to get there. I count on all of us to deliver. Of course, this is not just about how much money we spend on defense. It is also about what we spend the money on and how we spend it. At Wales, we committed to spending 20% of defense budgets on equipment, technology, and research and development. We have identified specific areas where we need to improve our capabilities, such as ballistic missile defense, training and exercise, and full equipping our land forces. We must make progress on all these areas to ensure that our forces remain strong and able to deploy at short notice. NATO can really add value when it comes to how defense budgets are spent, by helping allies to align their priorities, to plan together, pool their resources, and get the most for taxpayers' money. There are many examples of how we are doing just that. For example, the new system of drones and other capabilities that make up the Alliance ground surveillance system, operated and maintained by NATO, giving our commanders a comprehensive picture of the situation on the ground. Or the framework nation concept agreed at Wales, where groups of European allies work together to develop particular forces or capabilities guided by a lead nation. And here in the Netherlands, we are in a country that is a prime example of regional cooperation. Dutch armed forces cooperate closely with their counterparts in Belgium, Luxembourg, Germany, and the United Kingdom. Naval forces combine with Belgian naval forces under a single admiral. Allies gain a great deal from multinational cooperation, including our smart defense initiatives, getting the most out of every dollar, every euro, and every pound. To spend better, to spend smarter is important, but it's not a substitute for sufficient resources. We cannot do more with less indefinitely. And defense cannot take an excessive share of the austerity burden. We must be clear with our publics about why we need to increase defense investment. And we must continue our efforts towards greater transparency. When it comes to NATO budgets, allies maintain full control over how much and how effectively taxpayers' money is spent in the interest of our shared security. The budget is rigorously audited by an independent team of auditors. And this independent board regularly reports to the North Atlantic Council. Allies review all reports, and unclassified reports are now published on the NATO website. I also intend to continue publishing an annual report on what NATO does, including defense spending. And we will go further. In February, I expect defense ministers will agree on additional measures to increase financial transparency and accountability. Ladies and gentlemen, defense investments in times of austerity calls for hard choices at home, in every government and in every parliament. But the time has come to stop cuts. We must invest more in defense and spend our money better. And you, the parliamentarians, play a vital role in fulfilling the defense pledge we made at the Wales Summit. This is the first time heads of state and government have made such a pledge. And it is a pledge we must honor. It is my responsibility to work with you to implement what we decided. And I am personally committed to this. We all need to work hard, and we will all be judged on the progress we make. So I need you to make the case at home, to increase the momentum for more defense spending, to reach out across the political spectrum, and to persuade your constituents of the value of defense investment. So we have much to do together, and I thank you for your support. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General, for a great speech. You rightly say that the way that the world will look at NATO's decisions from the summit will depend upon how they're implemented. And I hope that we, as parliamentarians, meeting you regularly at our sessions, will be able to take the messages you give us back to our national parliaments to debate with colleagues. Now, I said I would invite questions in groups of 3. I'll pre-announce each group so you can be ready. The first group of 3 questions will come from Beatriz Rodriguez Salmones of Spain, followed by Mike Turner from the United States and Jacques Gauthier from France. And the second group will come from Paolo Ali of Italy, Oyas Kalnins from Latvia, and Oyvind Halleraka from Norway. So I invite, first of all, Beatriz Rodriguez Salmones in the red jacket, Mr. Secretary General, to ask the first question. You have a 2-minute limit. Beatriz.
I will switch to Spanish, if you don't mind. Muchas gracias, Secretario General, por su importante informe, por estar aquí y nuestros mejores deseos para todo el tiempo de su mandato. Mi pregunta es sobre Norte de África y Sahel. Es decir, es una zona de una potencia explosiva como ninguna, posiblemente en muy poco tiempo. Mi pregunta es sobre NATO, sobre la presencia de OTAN allí, la vigilancia y el análisis y la posible presencia. Hay países como Estados Unidos, como Francia, como España, que ya estamos ahí, pero quería saber su análisis y su perspectiva. La cuestión puede ser explosiva en el plazo de meses. Libia no terminó bien, es una zona muy armada y con una capacidad de terrorismo extremista muy importante. A veces se nos dice, en términos militares, que la historia de todos los fracasos se pueden resumir en 2 palabras: demasiado tarde. Querríamos saber qué está haciendo la OTAN para que cuando esto explote, y insisto, en cuestión de meses, no sea ya demasiado tarde. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. I now turn to Congressman Mike Turner from the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. Secretary General, thank you for being here, and thank you for your offer of a dialogue with the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. It's incredibly important that you be here, and we certainly appreciate your willingness to both keep us informed, but also to listen to the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. Thank you for your strong words concerning defense spending. The challenges that we face certainly are ones that go right to the issue of our reinvestment in our military capabilities. And the United States delegation certainly appreciates your recognition of the gap that needs to be filled and the encouragement to our European allies to increase their spending. I have 2 parts. The first is with respect to enlargement. I wanted to express our support from the United States delegation of the Wales summit statements concerning enlargement. The House of Representatives had passed a sense of Congress calling on NATO to be very strong on its positioning in the Wales summit with respect to membership for Montenegro, full court press diplomatic resolution to the naming of Macedonia, working with Bosnia on the constitutional issues that are an impediment to its membership, supporting MAP for Georgia, and of course, support for Ukraine. And my question goes to the issue of Ukraine. Many people ask whether or not the new relationship with Russia represents a Cold War. It's clear that in Ukraine it is a hot war. Poroshenko came before the United States Congress and addressed a joint session. He said 2 things that were incredibly important. One, he said, in the Ukraine, you don't have to build a democracy, you merely have to defend it. And then the second thing he said was, we cannot win the war with just blankets. I'd love your thoughts on how NATO could be more forward-leaning in its both military support and its full support for the Ukraine. Thank you.
Thirdly, I'd like to invite Jacques Gautier from France.
I will ask my question in French. Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le Secrétaire Général, mes chers collègues, permettez-moi à mon tour de remercier nos hôtes pour leur accueil et la parfaite organisation de cette session. Je souhaite également faire part aux Pays-Bas de notre solidarité et de toute notre amitié à la suite du drame du vol MH17. Monsieur le Secrétaire Général, je tiens tout d'abord à vous féliciter pour votre nomination. Nous vous apportons tous nos encouragements. Je crois qu'ils sont particulièrement importants dans cette période incertaine. Incertaine, nous l'avons vu avec les agissements de la Russie en Ukraine et dans d'autres pays de la région, comme la Géorgie ou la République de Moldova. Nous le voyons aussi avec les menaces que font peser sur notre sécurité des groupes terroristes particulièrement violents, voire barbares, dans notre voisinage immédiat. Le prétendu État islamique en Irak et au Levant n'est bien sûr pas un État, mais il constitue plus qu'un simple groupuscule. Il occupe un territoire important et mène des attaques coordonnées. La France s'est mobilisée en matière rapide et décisive pour stopper les groupes terroristes qui allaient conquérir le Mali, et nous participons activement à la coalition internationale qui intervient en Irak. Mais nous voyons aujourd'hui que Daesh tend à fédérer, ou au moins à rallier à son drapeau, un certain nombre de groupes jusque-là éparpillés au Sahel ou encore au Nigeria. En outre, Daesh exerce un pouvoir d'attirance incroyable pour un certain nombre de jeunes qui quittent nos pays pour aller faire le djihad et sont susceptibles de revenir commettre des attentats sur nos territoires. Quelle coopération les alliés peuvent-ils mettre en place? L'OTAN peut-il jouer un rôle en la matière de coordination et de surveillance? Je vous remercie.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary General.
Thank you so much for the questions. First to the question related to North Africa. I would very much like to underline that what is happening in North Africa is actually a reminder of the changing security environment we are facing, with instability, insecurity coming closer to our borders. And therefore, what NATO does is to work together with our partners, because I think we have to admit that it is extremely important to try to avoid that we are coming in situations as we have seen developing in some countries in North Africa, in particular in Libya. And we have to try to stabilize, to help countries being able to take care of their own security by themselves. And therefore to build capacity, to help them improving their own security sector, their own forces themselves, is something we can do to try to project stability into North Africa. And part of the partnership cooperation, which was an important part of the Wales decision, is aiming exactly at that. When it comes to Libya in particular, I think it reminds us of that of course, what NATO did was to conduct a military operation which was successful related to the goals of that operation. And that was to stop the killing of civilians, and it had the clear UN mandate. But after the military operation ended, the international society should have been more prepared to take care of the work to try to create a stable, democratic Libya, and to make sure that we were able to develop a more peaceful situation in the country. That's something NATO is not, what I say, solely responsible for. That is other organizations, UN, the European Union, the African Union, and we have to work together with them in North Africa to try to create stability and to manage threats and the challenges we are seeing in North Africa. Then when it comes to Ukraine, the question from Mike Turner. So what NATO is doing is that we are, first of all, of course, fully supporting the independence, the sovereignty, and the territorial integrity of Ukraine. And we are calling on Russia to stop violating international law and to respect the sovereignty of Ukraine. And we are calling on Russia to pull back its forces from eastern Ukraine and to respect the Minsk agreements and to stop fueling the conflict by supporting the separatists and use all its influence on the separatists to make sure that they are respecting the ceasefire. We have also established several trust funds through which NATO and allied countries are helping Ukraine in developing their defense sector, improving their own capability to take care of their own security by themselves. And in addition to what NATO does, of course, different allies are contributing in different ways to support Ukraine. Then to the question related to ISIL. Of course, we as all other as NATO and all NATO allies are condemning the horrific atrocities and the use of violence which ISIL is responsible for. And I welcome the actions and the airstrikes by the coalition to stop the actions by ISIL. And I also welcome what France is doing in Mali to fight terrorists there, because there are many different NATO allies which are contributing in different ways, both in Iraq, Syria to fight ISIL, but also in Mali and North Africa to fight extremist groups and terrorists there. There has been no call for a NATO military role in North Africa, but we welcome the efforts by France and others to fight terrorist groups in North Africa. And as I said in my first answer, we're also trying to build partnerships with several countries in North Africa to try to develop stability and to project stability into the region.
Before I call the next group, I would like to announce the people in the third group. There'll be Dr. Karl Lammers of Germany, Ali Reza Alaboyan of Turkey, and Rostislav Pavlenko from Ukraine. But to go now to the second group, the first speaker in the second group is Paolo Ali, Mr. Paolo Ali of Italy.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will address my question in Italian. Signor Segretario, la NATO ha certamente una chiara visione degli scenari complessi e molto strettamente correlati tra loro del Medio Oriente, dell'Africa del Nord e della regione subsahariana. Del resto lei è già intervenuto su questo. È evidente che non possono più essere considerati conflitti regionali tutti questi, ma si tratta di sfide globali per tutto l'Occidente e probabilmente anche per la stessa Russia. Il meeting del GSM che abbiamo tenuto a Catania alcune settimane fa ha dimostrato in modo molto chiaro che i nuovi rischi come ISIS o Daesh, il conflitto siriano, vecchi rischi come il conflitto israelo-palestinese, la situazione in Libia, il tema dei foreign fighters non sono solo problemi per i nostri paesi, ma sono problemi per i paesi dove questi conflitti hanno luogo. In particolare le nazioni, i paesi della NATO che si affacciano sul Mediterraneo oggi soffrono di problemi gravi, di gravi pesi finanziari e sociopolitici legati ai fenomeni dell'immigrazione, e alle crisi umanitarie dovute ai numeri enormi di rifugiati politici. Questi sono ambiti nei quali la NATO può fare qualcosa. Le mie domande sono due e sono molto semplici. Qual è la strategia complessiva della NATO su questi scenari e su questi problemi, in particolare tenendo conto degli aspetti umanitari che sottolineavo poco fa? E la seconda parte della domanda, che può essere rivolta anche alla crisi con l'Ucraina e quindi ai rapporti con la Russia: quanto lei ritiene importante mantenere aperto e lavorare sulla via di una soluzione politica e diplomatica per risolvere tutti questi problemi? Grazie.
Thank you, Paolo. And sitting very close to Mr. Ali is Ojas Kalnins from Latvia.
Thank you, Mr. President. The establishment of a NATO Excellence Center for Strategic Communications in Riga, Latvia, gives our countries a powerful new tool to combat information warfare around the world. And I stress around the world because it's not just Russia's propaganda war concerning Ukraine, but it's also international terrorist organizations like ISIL or Al-Qaeda who have become masters of manipulating the social media. I recently had a talk with our High Representative Federica Mogherini, who agreed that combating information warfare and strategic communications may be an ideal opportunity for NATO-EU cooperation. And I just wanted to hear your views about that. Thank you.
And thirdly, Øyvind Halleraker from Norway.
Thank you, President. Mr. Secretary General, first of all, I will like to congratulate you on an effective start on your important work to further strengthen our alliance. Collective defense capacity in NATO is now higher on the agenda following the Russian aggression in Ukraine. In Norway, we have, as you know, a history of good cooperation with Russia. But we also notice increased Russian military activity in the High North in the recent year. In light of the Russian military buildup, I would like to ask you how NATO can contribute to continued stability in the High North area in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you so much. First to the question from Paolo Ali related to the overall strategy when it comes to threats and instability in the Middle East and North Africa. So the overall responsibility of NATO is to protect and defend all allies against any threat. So therefore, our main focus is always the defense and the protection of allied members. And that's also the reason why we have deployed Patriot missiles in Turkey to augment, to increase their air defense capacity. And that's the reason why we have also decided to increase, for instance, the sharing of information on foreign fighters and returning foreign fighters, because that can pose a threat to our nations. At the same time, I think we have to understand that even though NATO is very often at least part of the part of the answer to many problems, NATO is not always the only answer to all problems. And for instance, in Syria and Iraq, there has been no call for a NATO-organized military operation or mission, but all NATO allies are in one way or another part of the coalition which is fighting ISIL in Iraq and Syria. Some are part of the decisive military actions, the airstrikes. Others are supporting the Peshmerga, and others are providing humanitarian aid. So the bulk of the resources in the coalition is provided by NATO allies, even if NATO as such is not organizing the operations. So we are approaching this in many ways, partly as an alliance and partly as allied countries participating, for instance, in the coalition we have in fighting ISIL in Syria and Iraq. Then you also me also about Ukraine and if there is any possibilities or need or wish for a diplomatic solution. Also, in the long run, we need a political solution to all conflicts, and what we are calling for in Ukraine is that the two Minsk protocols are being respected, and that the ceasefire is being respected, and we call for Russia and the separatists to be part of a negotiated peaceful solution, and not continue on a path towards isolation, and which is only fueling the armed conflicts and fighting in the region. Then to Mr. Kalnis from Latvia's questions about strategic communication. So I just visited Latvia, and I'm very impressed by the knowledge, by the understanding of the importance of strategic communication, and that's part of the new security environment. That's part of the threat posed by hybrid warfare, and therefore communication is also important, and to avoid all kinds of cyber attacks. And I very much welcome that we can look into how we can cooperate with the European Union on this. Because I met with the High Representative Federica Mogherini just 2 days after she took office, and we very much agree that we should continue and expand our cooperation. And of course, one of those areas would be strategic communication, which is just becoming more and more important. And then to the High North, I think that the lesson learned from the High North is that there is no contradiction between military strength, a strong alliance, investing in defense, and at the same time striving for dialogue, partnership, and cooperation. Actually, at least the Norwegian experience is that investing in our armed forces, when I was Prime Minister then, and also previous governments, and being part of a strong NATO alliance was the precondition for engaging with Russia. Strength, firm, predictable policies creates the foundation for engaging with Russia, and therefore we need to continue, both as an alliance but also Norway as an allied country, to invest in defense, to keep up collective defense, and that creates the basis for engaging with Russia on issues which are of importance in High North, like energy, environment, search and rescue, and other areas where I know that there is a lot of cooperation in the High North between NATO allies and Russia.
Thank you, Secretary General. Before I call the third group, I'd like to put the fourth group on notice. Tado Jafaridze from Georgia, Samir Campbell from the UK, and Cheryl Gallant from Canada. But to return to the third group, I'd like to introduce my predecessor as President of the Assembly, Dr. Karl Lammers of Germany.
Thank you, Mr. President. Secretary General, first of all, congratulations and good luck and success for your work as Secretary General for Peace and Freedom. NATO is facing many challenges. Let me turn to Russia. Russia, for a long time, was a strategic partner for NATO and a partner for modernization. And now we see a break of international law. We see disregard of the sovereignty of independent countries. And I think Russia is aiming in this time to rebuild its sphere of influence in the post-Soviet area at the cost of its neighbors, and especially those which have Euro-Atlantic aspirations. Secretary General, we, I think, as NATO have a two-track approach. First of all, a very clear answer with a NATO summit in Wales, with a very high readiness task force, and with our policy to remain the door open. Do you think, and that is my question, that NATO in this time is unified and firmed enough to give an appropriate answer to Russia and to Putin, that he will understand our signal? And secondly, do you think that he is open for dialogue? Does he listen to that, what we say? And do you think that we, both NATO and NATO Parliamentary Assembly, can do more in our cooperation to enhance peace and security? Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. I now turn to Ali Riza Alaboyan from Turkey. Just here.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. So I would like to congratulate Secretary General's new job. I am sure he will be very successful. So he made one of the first visits to Turkey. So one of the main problems in the Middle East is Syria. You know, last 3.5 years, we have been facing one of the biggest problems. And more than 250,000 people have been killed, almost around 9 people either refugee or IDP. And Turkey is almost hosting 2 million people, 2 million refugees from Syria. Last month alone, when the ISIL attacked Kobani, in 2 days, we received 150,000 refugees from the Kobani Kurdish region of Syria. So we spent almost $4 billion. It is going to create another social problem in Turkey, Turkey's political life and the social life. So Turkey demands the no-fly zone, especially to keep the people in a proper and the safety zone. So what do you think about this? This is the first one. Second question is regarding the territorial integrity of Caucasus. In Wales Summit Declaration, Article 30 says that allies also remain committed in their support to territorial integrity, independence, and the sovereignty of Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Republic of Moldova. But Russia is already separated Abkhazia and South Ossetia from Georgia. And Russia did same thing, Crimea in Ukraine. So what do you think generally in this subject? Thank you very much.
Thirdly, in this group, Mr. Rostislav Pavlenko from Ukraine, who I think, Mr. Secretary General, is right at the back of a hall on the left-hand side.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Secretary General, after Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov said that Russia demands guarantees that Ukraine will never be a NATO member, NATO representatives have expressed their surprise and reassured the choice of Ukrainian people, and we appreciate this very much. Yet we see some of the politicians from key countries cited that they would not see Ukrainian membership even in the future. When Ukraine is ready, and as we know that successive summits of the NATO have stressed that the door is open. So provided that Ukraine is NATO, if Ukraine is ready for the NATO, what would be the alliance approach to its membership? Thank you very much.
Thank you. First to Carl Lammers. No, you are right. I mean, what we did in Wales was to decide both to invest in our collective defense, to increase our military capabilities, to follow up the defense pledge, and to implement the readiness action plan, which altogether is, as I said, the strongest increase in our collective defense since the end of the Cold War. But at the same time, we stated once again that we aspire for a more constructive and cooperative relationship with Russia. And as I mentioned in my answer related to the High North, there is no contradiction between those two messages, because I'm sure that the precondition for NATO being able to, at some stage, re-establishing a more cooperative and constructive relationship with Russia that depends on our ability to deliver collective defense, be strong in our engagement with Russia. NATO is going to be there, Russia is going to be there, Russia is NATO's biggest neighbor, so in one way or another we are going to relate. And even during the Cold War, we had areas where we worked together and where we developed different kinds of cooperation. And for instance, now when we have the military buildup, we have more SNAP exercises, we have more military presence along NATO borders, we have the increased military air activity by Russia along NATO borders, and we also have more NATO presence in the eastern part of the alliance as an answer to that. The need for avoiding that situations are coming out of control, that accidents are spiraling into something we all would avoid, increases the need for transparency, predictability, for instance, related to different kinds of military exercises, military presence. So that's just one area where actually the need for cooperation with Russia is bigger when the situation is bad, and as it is now, than when the situation is better, as it was for some years ago. So that's just one area where I would like to have, what should I say, more transparency, more predictability related to exercises, military presence along the borders. Whether Russia is willing, it's not possible for me to give you an exact answer. What I see is what are the Russians' actions on the ground, and so far they have acted in ways which undermines the possibilities and the conditions for a constructive relationship, and I regret that because I'm really convinced that in the long run it's both in the interest of NATO but also in the interest of Russia to have a relationship based on trust, on respect of respect for international law, and open trade, close cooperation. Then, when it comes to the question from our Turkish MP, or Member of Parliament, I will just say that I very much commend Turkey for the way you are hosting hundreds of thousands of refugees coming from Syria and Iraq. There is no NATO ally more affected by the crisis in Syria and Iraq than Turkey. And I visited Ankara a few weeks ago, and I was very much reminded on the heavy burden Turkey is shouldering by hosting so many hundred thousands of refugees. Again, NATO's main responsibility is to protect and defend all allies, and that's the reason why we are, and that's of course also valid for Turkey, and that's the reason why we have deployed the Patriot batteries in Turkey. And even though NATO is not organizing or in charge of the military operations in Syria and Iraq, all NATO allies are in one way or another participating in the coalition fighting ISIL. When it comes to no-fly zone, I think since NATO is not organizing or responsible for the military actions, I think it's wise of me to leave that to the dialogue between Turkey and the coalition. And I know that there is close dialogue between the coalition, United States and Turkey, to how to expand their cooperation on fighting ISIL. And on the table is also the question of a no-fly zone, but that's not for me to give any advice on that. When it comes to Ukraine and the open door policy. So first of all, the open door policy has been a great success. I mean, during the last 2 decades, NATO has been enlarged and NATO now protects almost 1 billion people. And it has contributed to more democracy, more stability, more freedom, prosperity in new members or new allies in NATO. The enlargement has been a great success. The open door is still open, and it's something we decided. And I remember I was at the summit in Bucharest where we decided that Ukraine will become a member. And that decision still stands, of course, providing that Ukraine fulfills the criteria for membership and providing that Ukraine so will. Ukraine has decided to have a non-block policy, and therefore the question of Ukrainian membership has not been on the table the last years because Ukraine has decided not to apply for membership. I respect that because it's up to each sovereign nation to decide itself what kind of security arrangements it would like to be part of, and therefore I respect the decisions of Ukraine, but our policy is the same. The door is open, and it's open for countries which fulfill the criteria for becoming NATO allies, and that's also valid for Ukraine.
And now, before introducing the fourth group, I'd like to put the fifth group on notice, Mrs. Marianne Mikko from Estonia, followed by Harry van Bommel from the Netherlands and Korian Nahapetian from Armenia. But first, a fourth group. The first of a fourth group is Mr. Tedo Japaridze from Georgia, who is more or less in this direction, Secretary General.
Thank you very much. At the outset, on behalf of Georgian delegation, I'd like to thank you, President Bailey, for this excellent job, and we really appreciate that very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General, for your support, Georgia's NATO aspiration, and that support was reaffirmed by you in your recent meeting with our Prime Minister in Brussels. This is welcome recognition of Georgia's steady contribution to NATO in Afghanistan and also to NATO allies in Iraq, in anticipation that Georgia will exceed. These operations where our blood has been spilled demonstrate our commitment to the alliance. It is encouraging that NATO is also supporting our aspirations. But there is still a couple of technical matters, Mr. Secretary General, of compliance on that way, despite the fact that, as admitted in Cardiff final document, Georgia has almost all necessary tools, National Action Plan, NATO-Georgia Commission, and now NATO-Georgia Substantial Package. So my question is, so what else should Georgia be engaged for its NATO accession agenda, and what else Georgia should do to facilitate this process? And on another issue, Mr. Secretary General, exactly today, Russia is going to sign a treaty with Abkhazia, and soon it would be followed with their treaty with South Ossetia, and these are, occupied territories of Georgia. So there is easy question for you, Mr. Secretary General, and my Turkish colleague talked about that. How a country like Georgia should deal with a neighbor like Russia? Thank you.
Thank you. And the second question group comes from Semingis Campbell, who is in the middle of a block ahead of you.
Secretary General, may I begin on behalf of the United Kingdom delegation in congratulating you on your appointment, and indeed to welcome your concentration earlier this morning on the issue of defence budgets. I hope you won't be made pessimistic if I say that I've been coming to assemblies for quite a long time, and I've heard Secretary General after Secretary General concentrate on the issue of expenditure, and yet we now find ourselves in the circumstances which you have described. What makes you optimistic that on this occasion the views which you have expressed will be received and echoed in domestic parliaments and governments so as to ensure that obligations to this alliance are properly fulfilled? And if they are not, what in your view will be the consequences?
Thirdly, I'd turn to Mrs. Cheryl Gallant from Canada, who is in the left-hand block, 3 rows back.
Welcome to the Assembly, Secretary General. Some of the general public already thinks that the efforts to stop the spread of ISIL are under NATO command. Now, with reports of ISIL claiming a part of Libya as now part of its caliphate, and currently ISIL being just next door to Turkey, and other al-Qaeda splinter groups forming a front across North Africa, is a consensus even forming in the NAC that a NATO-led, of course together with its partners, a NATO-led mission to stop ISIL and other al-Qaeda breakaway terrorist organizations from gaining ground in Europe?
Yeah, thank you again. First, to the representative from Georgia. So we are now implementing the comprehensive package which we decided on in Wales. And that's about training, that's about defense capacity building measures, and it's also about establishing the training center in Georgia, and to have embedded trainers from NATO coming there. So we are now implementing the most comprehensive package we have ever had for Georgia, and that will of course move Georgia towards membership. So I think we should implement that package, and then to discuss after that whether there is need for anything more, because this is really a comprehensive package we have agreed on. And I also commend Georgia for its very valuable contributions to many different NATO operations, especially in Afghanistan. So Georgia is already a very highly valued partner of NATO. Then I forgot, and I can because I was asked by by the Turkish representative and now also by you about Abkhazia, and of course NATO allies do not recognize neither Abkhazia nor South Ossetia as independent states. They are part of Georgia. They are within the international recognized borders of Georgia, and we support Georgia and we respect the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Georgia, and we call on all other countries to do the same. So we, NATO allies do not recognize South Ossetia or Abkhazia being any kind of independent states. They are part of Georgia. Then to Mr. Campbell, and you told me that you have heard it before, and that's true. But what I say, it's an important message, so I think it's important to repeat it. But then the question is why should it be reality this time? And I think there are at least some very important things which makes this time different. And the first thing is that the security environment has really changed. During the 1990s and also at least the beginning of the 2000s, we had the end of the Cold War. We had the expectation of some kind of peace dividend, and that was some kind of reason for reducing defense expenditure. And then we had the financial crisis on the top of that. Now we have seen a much more aggressive policy of Russia in Ukraine, and also threats coming from the south, coming closer. Iraq and Syria is close to NATO borders. Afghanistan was of course a challenge and something which was also posing a threat to to NATO. That's the reason why we went into the ISAF mission. But in one way it was a longer way. Now it's close to our borders. Both North Africa, Syria and Iraq is close to our borders. So the first reason for really believing that we are going to make a difference now, that defense budgets are going to be increased, is that the security environment has changed. It's something new that Russia is using force to change borders in Europe, and that requires a response, a change from NATO allies. The second reason is that this is actually the first time heads of state and government has made this kind of pledge. We have had some guidelines, with all respect, from defense ministers before, but now we made a pledge on a summit where all heads of state and government were present. And of course, part of the pledge is some kind of long term. We will aim to move towards 2% within a decade. That's a bit vague, to be honest, but the direction is very clear. We are going to increase. And then part of the pledge is not vague, it's very clear. And that is that we're going to stop the cuts, and that is that we're going to increase in real term defense spending as our economies improve. So that's very, very concrete, and it's much more concrete and much more committing than language we have seen before. And the third reason I believe that it's possible is that we have seen now several NATO allies who have actually stopped the cuts. I visited last week the 3 Baltic countries. Estonia is, that's small countries, but of course all countries contributes. Estonia has already reached 2%, and Lithuania and Latvia are really now increasing their defense expenditures. So that's just 3 examples of countries which are now taking it more seriously because the security environment has changed, especially along our eastern borders. Then Canada. Also, I hope I understood your question, but the thing is that NATO's main responsibility is to protect all allies, and we are doing so. For instance, by establishing the Readiness Action Force and implementing the Readiness Action Plan and establishing the Spearhead Force, a force which is able to deploy on a very short notice. This is of course a force, and this is of course an increase in our capabilities, which can protect us both from threats coming from the south and from the east. So it just increase our collective defense against many different kinds of threats. Then we have decided to work closer on fighting the terrorist threats coming from returning foreign fighters. And then we have, as I said, done something in Turkey, which is closest, or which is very close to the challenges, the threats, the instability in Iraq and Syria. But there has been no call for a NATO-led mission, military mission, neither in Syria nor in Iraq or North Africa. Different NATO allies are participating in different ways, and I welcome that. But as I said, it's not always NATO that should organize or lead all different operations. Sometimes it is better to organize this in other ways, like we have seen has been the wish when it comes to the decisive military actions which are now taken against ISIL in Syria and Iraq. In addition to this, NATO stands ready to help Iraq increasing the strength and the capabilities of Iraq's defense and armed forces, if so requested by Iraq. That was a decision taken in Wales, and we stand ready to do so when or if the Iraqi government wants us to help them with defense capacity building measures in Iraq.
Thank you. I put the sixth group on notice, Manuel Carrera de Jesus from Portugal, Boris Blažeković from Croatia, and Eva Kaili from the European Parliament. But first to call the third group, Mrs. Marianne Mikko from Estonia. Who is...
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to congratulate you, Mr. Stoltenberg, of your appointment in this turbulent and uncertain time we all are facing here in Europe and worldwide. We NATO Parliamentary Assembly members have heard during these days here in Hague a lot of times we need to stand firm to our values, we need to maintain and communicate unity among ourselves. I fully agree. But the devil is in details. Nice words have to be backed with action in reality. Otherwise, one could take wonderful words, nothing else but hot air. Let me ask rhetorically, how to remain united when one of us in NATO family is dealing with Russia in manner business as usual, handing over 2 helicopter carriers to Russia? What about our values? What about the fact in Europe there is ongoing war in Ukraine? Secretary General, I would like to make it clear, what is our NATO all about? Is that ally of values such as democracy, rule of law, or that is just pure pragmatism? Thank you.
Next I call Harry van Bommel from the Netherlands. You seem to have...
Yes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Secretary General, I'd like to congratulate you with your new mission. It is a difficult one. Indeed, we are living in difficult times. I must say I was rather disappointed by your opening speech because it was about money, all about money. And we're very happy to have this question and answering session to ask you about crisis that we are facing and still facing. For instance, in Afghanistan. Afghanistan was once called the litmus test for NATO, and one of your predecessors, Mr. de Hoop-Scheffer, even said that we must succeed in Afghanistan. If we fail in Afghanistan, NATO has no reason to exist. Could you comment on the present situation in Afghanistan and NATO's strategy in the near future in that particular country? Thank you very much.
And thirdly in this group, Mr. Koryon Nahapetian from Armenia, who is on the right-hand side of the hall, Secretary General.
Thank you, Mr. President. Secretary General, I would like to congratulate and wish you a very productive performance on the indeed important job. A major concern in the South Caucasus and its wider proximity is the continuously accumulating tensions that may lead to emergence of new geopolitical dividing lines in the mentioned region and in Europe overall. My first question is, what's your vision on development of the cooperation with the partner countries, particularly in South Caucasus? What must be done in order to carry out the partnerships in ways that would raise the overall security environment in the region and transatlantic space, boost the security, peace and economic ties, all without a risk or preconditions for additional security escalation in mid or long term, with a clear direction aimed at building a more inclusive Europe, free of new dividing lines. Secondly, there is an increasing atmosphere of distrust and suspicion building up in regards to unresolved conflicts, with insufficient or inadequate reaction from the international community. The frozen or unsolved conflicts threaten to become active with the potential of major distractions and colossal human loss. In this regard, I would like to ask you, isn't it time for the international community to call the recent act of aggression of shooting down the Nagorno-Karabakh Republic helicopter and killing of its 3 pilots during a training flight with true name, instead of formulating diplomatic messages calling for balance, as we all are aware that such formulations are constantly being ignored. Isn't it time to use some real pressure and even sanctions toward initiators of hostilities in South Caucasus as well?
Thank you. Secretary General.
Thank you. First to Marianne Mikko. You underlined that we have to stand firm on our values, but it has to be actions. And you referred to the Russian aggression against Ukraine. And in my view, NATO has really responded in a firm and a strong way to the aggressive actions we have seen in Ukraine, which Russia is responsible for. We have, of course, responded very clearly politically and supported Ukraine and called for Russia to withdraw its troops. But in addition, we have implemented what we call the assurance measures, increased our presence in the air, more ships at sea, and more forces on the ground. And just the increased NATO air policing and the increase of NATO jets and AVAX planes in the eastern part of the region means that we have 5 times as much NATO planes in the air now than we had at the beginning of the year. So that's a substantial increase. It's actions, it's something concrete. We have more ships in the Black Sea and the Baltic Sea, and we have more troops on rotational basis in our eastern allied countries. In addition, we are following up, implementing the Readiness Action Plan, establishing the Spearhead Force, increasing our ability to do intelligence, surveillance, strategic situation awareness, and we are investing in many different kinds of new capabilities. So when it comes to the response to what we have seen in the East, NATO has already delivered, and we, with actions, with boots, with troops, with planes, with ships, but in addition, we are in the process of implementing and delivering even more. Because I 100% agree with you that, of course, we need the values, we need the language, we need the decisions, but even more important, we need the implementation. And one of my main responsibilities as Secretary General is to make sure that we are implementing. And that's actually one of the reasons why I also focus so much on funding, on the defense pledge, on financial resources. Because perhaps the most difficult obstacle we are facing is the lack of resources. We need funding, we need budgets to be able to implement the Readiness Action Plan, to have the Spearhead Force, to have more capabilities, to invest in cyber defense, and many other capacities and capabilities we need. And without funding, without increased budgets, we will not be able to implement. Then Harry van Bommel from the Netherlands, he asked me, or you asked me about my assessments of Afghanistan. And what I said in my speech is that we are going to launch the Resolute Support Mission at the 1st of January, and that's a mission which is a non-combat mission. It's train, advise and assist, and we're going to train, assist and advise the the Afghan security forces. What we have been able, or what we have achieved in Afghanistan, is that we have prevented Afghanistan from being a place where terrorist organizations can have a safe haven for organizing terrorist attacks. We have succeeded in developing the Afghan national security forces from literally almost nothing to now a strong force of 350,000 soldiers and police. And we are going to continue to support Afghanistan, partly by the Resolute Support Mission, which is going to be launched 1st of January, and the legal arrangements were adopted by the Afghan parliament just a day ago. Partly by continuing to finance, to give financial support to the national Afghan security forces, and partly through a long-term partnership. All of this will require financial resources. And that's again the reason why I focus so much on financial resources. Because if you are going to continue to support the Afghan national security forces, and at the same time being able to go into long-term partnership, and at the same time doing something with the crisis we see in Syria and Iraq and North Africa, and to develop and implement the decisions related to the Readiness Action Plan, which is the biggest increase now in collective defense since the Cold War, then we need increased financial resources. So really the bridge we need, the tools we need to handle with many different crises, both the crisis we see today but also the crisis in the future, is that this time we have to deliver on the pledge when it comes to increased defense spending, because if we don't deliver on that, then it will be words and no, concrete actions and follow-up of all the decisions we made at Wales. And then the representative from Armenia. Partnerships, we welcome that. Partnerships is very important part of the cooperative security NATO is striving to establish. And we have partnerships with Armenia. And partnerships is an important part of how we develop cooperation with different countries and try to project stability. Then I am also very concerned with the recent incidents of violence in Nagorno-Karabakh. And I think this just underlines that there is no military solution to the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. And there is actually no alternative to a political solution. I don't see any direct NATO role, but instead NATO support the Minsk process and the efforts of the 3 Minsk group chairs to try to push for and to develop the conditions for a lasting, peaceful and negotiated solution to the violence and to the challenges we see in Nagorno-Karabakh.
Colleagues, I'm looking at the list of members indicating they want to speak, and it seems to me the fairest thing for me to do would be to cut the question time for each speaker to 1 minute rather than 2, which will mean we'll get extra colleagues in. I'm sorry to jump this on you in the middle of the proceedings, but it seems to me it's the fairest thing to do. The 7th group will consist of Mr. Han ten Broek from the Netherlands, followed by Mrs. Malahat Ibrahim Gizi from Azerbaijan and Raza Juknavician from Lithuania. But first we go to the 6th group, and I invite Manuel Carreira de Jesus from Portugal.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le Secrétaire Général. Il y a quelques jours, nous avons assisté à des manœuvres militaires russes, aériennes et maritimes dans l'Atlantique, qui ont conduit à l'intervention des forces armées portugaises en particulier de la marine et de l'armée de l'air, pour escorter respectivement un navire hydrographique russe en opération dans la zone économique exclusive portugaise et 7 avions militaires de combat aussi russes. Vous semble-t-il, Monsieur le Secrétaire général, que nous devons voir cette augmentation de l'activité militaire par Moscou comme une simple démonstration de force ou comme quelque chose de plus grave avec laquelle l'Alliance devrait être sérieusement préoccupée? Merci.
Thank you, Manuel, thank you for reducing your question at such short notice. Next comes Boris Blažeković from Croatia, who is on this side of a hall.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, let me express my gratitude to our Dutch friends for hosting us so nice. Hunter Brocke, you did great, with all your team, you did a great job. Mr. Secretary General, NATO World Summit once again put an emphasis on its open door policy and importance of enlargement of the alliance. Montenegro, the country we joined Partnership for Peace program in 2006 and was invited to join Membership Action Plan in 2009, did not receive the invitation to join the alliance yet. NATO leaders agreed to intensify talks and negotiations with Montenegro and decide if it's ready to join the alliance by the end of 2015. Montenegro, who actively participates in NATO-led operations in Afghanistan and Somalia, is currently conducting the reform of its armed forces and is conducting an effort to meet all the criteria set in front of them. Mr. Secretary General, please, could you say your expectations regarding the process of accession of Montenegro?
Thirdly, Mrs. Eva Kaili from the European Parliament.
Secretary General, EU is a strategic partner for NATO and our cooperation is essential for a European collective defense and security policy for our territory and also our shared common values and democracy. So I would like to ask you, do you think the increase of spendings will help us share the burden for stability of our common borders? And we face new global threats. Do you think we are ready to protect our citizens? And how soon will the new Readiness Action Plan will be ready to answer these threats? Should this force become permanent? And also I'd like to add, if there is a plan to address tensions that might occur between allies while implementing a plan B for energy security in the Mediterranean, can we expect to be protected from anyone not respecting international law? I'd like to ask also a time frame, and if you could perhaps be more specific on how and when the decisions of Wales will be implemented so that from the Baltic states to the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, EU citizens will feel protected. Thank you.
Thank you so much. First to Mr. Manuel Correa. I'm not able to comment directly on the concrete incident of a Russian ship which occurred outside your country. But what I can say is that we have seen increased Russian military activity around NATO borders, especially in the air. And that's the reason why NATO stays vigilant, and that's the reason why we have increased air policing, and we are doing what we are supposed to do. We are intercepting Russian planes when they are approaching NATO airspace, and of course we are also following ships which are moving towards our borders. So that just underlines in a way that we have already implemented different measures which has increased our capabilities to follow and to be present along NATO borders. Then to Mr. Boris Blažeković, as you said, we have established focused and intensified talks with Montenegro, and we had the honor and the pleasure of hosting the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister of Justice, Markovic, from Montenegro in the North Atlantic Council last week, and that was an excellent meeting. And we addressed also the different areas where Montenegro has to make progress to become a NATO member. And it was a very good and constructive part of the intensified dialogue to have the Deputy Prime Minister in the NAC. I think also very much that it is in itself important that we have decided a timeline and that we are going to assess the results by the end of 2015. What I can say is that, of course, that depends on the developments. It depends on the progress Montenegro is making on the different issues related to defense reform and so on, which we have identified together with Montenegro and which we now are working on together with Montenegro as part of the focused and intensified dialogue. We are still standing by the open door policy, and the countries who qualify are then welcome to be members, as stated in the decisions NATO has made related to the open door policy earlier. Then Eva Kalli from the European Parliament. I think it is important to underline that the Readiness Action Plan is about many different measures and many different elements. One of them is to maintain and to continue with the assurance measures. And that means that we are going to continue with increased air policing, 5 times as many planes in the air as we had before, AWACS fighter jets. We are going to continue with increased numbers of boots on the ground or forces on the ground on a rotational basis in our eastern allies. I have visited several of them, both in the Baltic countries and in Poland. And we're going to continue with increased naval presence in the Baltic Sea and in the Black Sea. So the insurance measures, which are of great importance, they are part of the Readiness Action Plan, and they are going to be continued. That's not something we're going to do in the future. That's already, what should I say, in action, and it's going to continue. The second thing is that it's going to take some time before we have established the readiness action, the spearhead force. But in the meantime, we are establishing an interim solution where we are establishing an interim spearhead force based on the existing NATO response force. So we're actually making parts of the existing NATO response force more ready, and that will be an interim solution until we have the more permanent spearhead force in place. And actually, Holland or the Netherlands is going to contribute to such a spearhead force, and other countries has already, as the interim solution, and other countries have already also made pledges for contributing to the interim solution, which are going to have already next year. Then there are many other elements: command and control, more situation awareness, intelligence, and so on. And we're working on all of them, and all are going to be implemented. But some are going to take some time before all are in place. But the implementation is actually already going on, and the rest is going to be implemented later on. And the decisions related to the composition, the size of the Spirit force is going to be taken at the NATO Defense Ministerial meeting in February. Yeah, that was the 3 questions.
I'm afraid we won't get down the whole list, but we'll make as much progress as we can. The 8th group will consist of Khaled Pashtun from Afghanistan, Josefina Topali from Albania, and Edmund Wittbrot from Poland. But first, the 7th group, I invite Han ten Broek from the Netherlands.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Secretary General. Welcome till Den Haag. I'm very happy that you talked about transparency and finance is the thing that we've been pushing for a very long time. Our Prime Minister has also addressed it, so thank you for doing that and keeping it up. One more thing that you want to keep up is the pledge that we made, or you made, in Wales, and we would like to ask you, how are you going to do that? How are you going to make the governments honor their pledge? On 3 issues. First, increase spending in real terms. Second, enlarge the capabilities. And third, beefing up the contribution to NATO missions. Thank you. Good luck with your work in the upcoming years, and lycka till.
Next, Mrs. Malahat Ibrahim Gizi from Azerbaijan, who is over at the side of the hall.
Thank you very much, dear Secretary General. The recent Paris talks held between the President of Azerbaijan and Armenia created hope in us concerning in peaceful settlement of the conflict in the region. Of course, it is a very good sign, but right after the talks, Armenian armed forces held military exercise in the legally recognized occupied territory of Azerbaijan, involved 40,000 soldiers and armed personnel. Despite of this information, Armenian side, several times Armenian military helicopters violated Azerbaijan airspace. Armenia blatantly undermines principles of international law and those in NATO partnership documents through aggression against Azerbaijan. Dear Secretary General, considering that NATO pursues peace and security in its neighborhood and in the region as well, in this context, how do you see the future outcomes of the peace talks vis-à-vis this conflict settlement? And using opportunity, I would like to congratulate your new position and good luck for your future. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. Thirdly, in this group, Braza Yuknavician from Lithuania.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, President. Many people were surprised what Russia did and what is doing in Ukraine. But I am a bit surprised why there were so many surprised people. Preparations for aggression started not yesterday and not last year. Military and civilian intelligence services of some NATO countries were giving quite alarming information for NATO politicians at least for 5 last years. My question will be on increasing Russian intelligence activities in the neighboring countries, and not only there. Russian hostile intelligence activities are in the highest levels. They are capable to intervene the political process, use dirty money to get influence via business, energy, especially energy companies, to spread corruption via politicians, political parties, using media and decision makers. Russia has built a structure for so-called soft power implementations and not hiding interest to influence our societies. My question, does NATO and you personally see these threats and Russian attempts to increase influence in NATO countries, their attempts to destabilize some countries even in NATO?
Thank you. First to Han ten Broek from the Netherlands. You asked me how I was going to make sure that the allies are implementing the decisions we made at the Wales summit related to the defense pledge and also providing capabilities, forces to our operations. And I will do that by engaging personally with the capitals. In all the meetings I'm going to have with the prime ministers, with presidents, with defense ministers, with foreign ministers, and also perhaps sometimes with the Minister of Finance, I will urge them and underline that it's not me asking them, but they decided to do something, and I'm going in a way to help them doing what they want to do. So it's not me deciding over them. I'm actually going to just remind them on what they have said that they would like to do themselves. But then, so I will do that in all my meetings, in all my travels and so on. But then I also very much depend on you, because the primary responsibility of all parliaments is to decide budgets. NATO Secretary Generals and NATO parliamentary assemblies and the North Atlantic Council is very important, but we don't decide on national budgets. That is something decided by each of the 28 allied national assemblies. And you are members of those assemblies. So you are key when it comes to making sure that through the whole alliance and also between different political groups, we have to deliver. And since the world has changed, the level of defense spending that was right some years ago is wrong today. And that's the reason why we decided to increase, and that's the reason why we have to deliver. And we did, partly we decided that those countries who are above 2%, and there are 4 today, they should remain above 2%. Partly we decided something which is some kind of long-term, at least a decade goal of 2%. But we also made decisions which has immediate impact. And that was to stop cuts, not tomorrow, but today. That's not something which can happen later. It has to happen in the first budget we decide. And in addition, we decided to increase in real terms, as you rightly said, defense spending when our economies are improving. So this is something, I mean, you ask me what I could do, but I ask actually you to do the job for me. And that's my main purpose of being here. And we need those funds to be able to meet all the other challenges we are facing, being it more aggressive actions, threats in the east, the south, or whatever. And that brings me then to the question from Azerbaijan. Both Azerbaijan and Armenia are valued partners of NATO. And we stated that again in Wales. And all allies remain committed in their support to the territorial integrity, independence and sovereignty of Armenia and Azerbaijan. And that's the reason why we continue to support efforts towards a peaceful settlement of the conflicts in the Caucasus, based on these principles and the norms of international law, the UN Charter and the Helsinki Final Act. But as I said, there is no direct NATO role in the conflict of Nagorno-Karabakh, but we support the efforts to try to find a peaceful negotiated settlement, and we support the efforts by the 3 chairmen of the Minsk process to try to make sure that we are moving forward in a difficult and important conflict. Then Lithuania. My main answer to you is that perhaps some was less surprised than others, and some in a way expected a more aggressive actions by Russia, for instance, in Ukraine. And others were able to predict that earlier. But regardless whether we were surprised or not, we have at least been able to agree on what is the response now. And that is that we have to give a firm, clear, and strong answer and response. And the best way we can do that is to continue to have increased military presence in the Baltic countries. We are going to do so. I visited all three of them last week. We had excellent discussions with all three. And also to implement the Readiness Action Plan, the Spirit Force, and all the other, the forward deployment of command and control, presence of forces on rotational basis, intelligence, situation awareness, and develop our strategies when it comes to hybrid warfare, and be able to protect all allies against any threat. Cyber, which is part of hybrid warfare. But then it has to be, the Readiness Action Plan is a plan 28 for 28. So all have to contribute. And one of the main issues I discussed in Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia was that Estonia, they are going to remain at the level of 2%. Lithuania and Latvia have to increase, as all other allied who are beneath or under the 2% level. So big allies have to contribute and small allies have to contribute. So we all have to stop cuts, increase spending, and move towards the 2% guideline. And then we can implement the Readiness Action Plan, and that's the best answer we have to what we have seen in Ukraine and eastern parts of our alliance the last month.
The Secretary General has very kindly offered to stay just 5 minutes extra in order that we can get the last two rounds of questions in, which will mean that every delegation will have asked at least one question, and I apologize to those who've indicated who I won't be able to call. I've already announced the members of Group 8. Group 9 will be Mr. Evripides Styliandis from Greece, Ms. Toron Igils-Dottir from Iceland, and Mr. Hamid Couscous from Morocco. But first I call Khalid Pashtun from Afghanistan.
Thank you, President. I would like to ask you a question to His Excellency. You have just mentioned that the BSA bilateral security agreement in Afghanistan was just yesterday ratified by the Afghan parliament. And beside that, we will have a free hand beyond 2014 in Afghanistan for the next 10 years. My question is here, sir, that since we have a 350,000 strong army and security forces in Afghanistan, but we have a very weak aerial support. Right now, as you know, there is a heavy fighting going on in the south of Afghanistan, and our army is not competent to compete with them without the aerial support. My question is, beyond 2014, would you be able, or the NATO forces would be able, to continue the aerial support beside the non-combat operation in Afghanistan, which you just mentioned, it will be the NATO engagement. But we are expecting more than that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Khalid. Next I call Mrs. Josefina Topali from Albania.
Thank you, Mr. President. Secretary General, so this is the 16th session of the NATO Assembly, in a time when the threat of terrorism is in the top of the global agenda, when the multiple crises in Iraq, Syria, Ukraine, etc. The Americans said that there is not cold war, it's a hot war. The Pope said that we are just in the Third World War. During the last time, Mr. Secretary General, I read on the media that Russia is doing military exercise in the south of Serbia. Is this true? So we have to see, to be also focused on the Balkans as in Ukraine in this moment of very dangerous, threatening times. Thank you.
Thank you, Josefina. And thirdly in this group, Edmund de Witbrot from Poland.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Mr. Secretary General, on behalf of the Polish delegation, I would like to congratulate you and to wish all the very best on your new position. We are very glad to host the next NATO summit in Warsaw 2016, and we hope that the key decision for NATO will be undertaken during the summit. And now I have two questions. Rapidly changing security environment, annexation of Crimea and Russian Federation's activity on eastern Ukraine require decision of Welsh summit, formation of the very high readiness joint task forces. What kind of decision mechanism would be applied for the deployment of these forces to the conflict regions? And additional question, what kind of role could play the Northeastern Corps in Szczecin if these forces are deployed in Central and Eastern Europe? Thank you very much.
Secretary General.
Okay. Now I have to be very brief because we are over time. And the problem is not the length of the questions. The problem is the length of the answers. So first to the question of from Afghanistan, from Khalid Pashtun, and that's we are going to go from a combat mission to a non-combat mission by the 1st of January when we move from ISAF to resolute support, and that at the same time we're going to continue to support the Afghan National Security Forces, and they have developed strong capabilities themselves. And besides that, I can just say that the details are going to be decided when we make the final decisions on the execution directive, which is going to be decided on in the NAC before we launch the mission, the resolute support mission. Albania, Serbia is a sovereign and independent country, and they decide themselves who they are conducting military exercises together with. But I agree with you that the Western Balkans is of great importance. There are several NATO partners there. We are in the process of discussing, or at least assessing the possibilities of memberships for Montenegro and other countries in the Western Balkan region. So that's a region which is of great importance for NATO. Poland, the very high readiness force, that's going to be used when necessary. And the Northeast Corps headquarters in Szczecin is a headquarters which we expect is going to play an important role when it comes to collective defense in that part of Europe. But these are among the details which are going to be decided at the Defense Ministerial meeting in February. We are now in the process of implementing the whole plan. We will get the military advice within a few days, and then we will start the process within NATO and make the final decisions in February. But Northeast, or the core headquarters in Szczecin is, as I said, a headquarters which is expected to play an important role in the whole spearhead force. Thank you.
I would like to call 4 speakers very briefly, please, because we're overrunning. First of all, Mr. Euripides Styliandis from Greece.
Thank you, Chairman. Here. Mr. General Secretary, on behalf of the Hellenic delegation, I would like to congratulate you for your new job, and I wish you all the best in your new important duty. Mr. General Secretary, thank you for the positive comments you have done for my country, Greece. We live the most serious economic crisis after the Second World War, but we give more than 2% of our GDP for defense and security because we feel the crucial international situation and the importance of NATO. My question is, 90% of the illegal immigrants from the Iraq and Syria who try to come to the European territory try to come through Greece. And we have to filter them by ourselves and more by our own cost. How can NATO help us to control if there are between them covered fighters of ISIS or Ebola victims? Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to invite Ms. Torun Egilsdottir from Iceland.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary General, thank you for your informative presentation. I wish you much success in your new capacity. The importance of ensuring regional security is an inseparable part of NATO and transatlantic collaboration. In recent years, we have witnessed increasing attention on the high north and the Arctic region. It is clear that the region is undergoing a transition which will have a growing effect on political and economic stability in the North Atlantic. The Arctic is a region of enduring strategic importance for NATO and allied security, not least now with the knowledge of increased Russian presence. Mr. Secretary General, I want to ask you how the High North will be addressed by NATO in changing geopolitical atmosphere and if NATO has defined its role in the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to invite Hamid Kuskus from Morocco, followed by a very brief comment from Mr. Dragan Sormaz of Serbia. Mr. Kuskus.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Secrétaire Général, tout d'abord, au nom de la délégation marocaine, je voudrais vous féliciter pour votre nomination et je voudrais saluer les efforts fournis par l'OTAN afin de renforcer et assurer la stabilité dans les pays en crise et saluer aussi les pays de l'Alliance pour leur intervention en Irak et en Syrie pour combattre l'État islamique Daesh qui constitue aussi une menace dans nos pays. Alors ma question porte surtout sur le rôle de l'OTAN en Afghanistan. Faut-il pas revoir la stratégie de l'OTAN dans ce pays, ne pas se contenter de l'intervention militaire seulement et se pencher surtout sur l'instauration des institutions démocratiques et le renforcement de la société civile afin d'assurer le cheminement des aides financières directement au peuple afghan afin de gagner leur confiance et de trouver des solutions alternatives. Et ça sera bien sûr un travail supplémentaire, comme vous l'avez dit, Monsieur le Secrétaire Général, afin d'éviter ce qui se passe en Libye. Ma deuxième question, je voudrais savoir si l'OTAN peut-il jouer le rôle de catalyseur dans les négociations entre l'Afghanistan et le Pakistan, conditions nécessaires pour assurer la stabilité et la paix dans le pays. Malheureusement, cette chose est rejetée par les talibans. Merci.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Dragan Sormaz from Serbia wished to make a comment.
Mr. Stoltenberg, I want to congratulate you on your new appointment. I hope that you and Serbian government will bring our relationships on higher level in next years. Serbia have his soldier in many missions, Mali, Central Africa, Somalia, Lebanon. We are co-sponsors of UN resolution fight against ISIS or terrorism. And I must say one thing for my dear colleagues in Parliamentary Assembly. Yes, there's going to be a military exercise in Serbia in next year, but with American army, not with Russian army. This is disinformation that my dear colleague from Albania have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. First to Greece. So we I understand very much the concerns you have about the illegal immigrants coming into your country. And of course, to some extent, that's also linked to the returning of foreign fighters of terrorist threat. And as I said, NATO has decided to enhance our cooperation and to increase the exchange of information related to foreign fighters and to work to do what we can to handle that threat which they impose on our countries. At the same time, I think we also have to understand that, for instance, border control and issues related to that is not a military issue. It's not a responsibility of NATO, but it's more for the European Union. And I know that the former defense minister of Greece is now going to take on the responsibility for immigration issues within the European Union. So I think you have also a good, friend there to raise these issues more related to responsibilities of the European Union than NATO when it comes to border control and so on. Then Egilsdottir from Iceland on the High North. Well, I very much believe in cooperation in the High North. There is a great potential for more cooperation, even though we have already achieved a lot, and that's important both for the management of the resources there, environment, energy, and again, we should also be able to continue the cooperation with Russia in the High North. But that's dependent, as it has been for a long time, depending on that we have a strong collective defense, which creates the basis for also engagement with Russia in the High North. Morocco, I think we have to underline that NATO is going to continue to work with Afghanistan. We are going to have the resolute support. We are going to have substantial financial support for the Afghan national security forces, and we are going to establish a long-term partnership. The content of that long-term partnership has not yet, been properly discussed. So now we actually should start, and President Ghani and Dr. Abdullah are coming to the NATO Foreign Ministers meeting in December, and that provides us with an opportunity to also discuss what kind of long-term partnership can we go into between NATO and Afghanistan. And then Serbia, I welcome the cooperation we have with Serbia. And again, I leave it to, in a way, Serbia to decide what kind of exercises they are doing. But anyhow, I believe that Serbia and NATO has a lot to do together, and that I very much look forward to develop further the cooperation between NATO and Serbia into the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. Mr. Stoltenberg, thank you for taking time to speak to us at this assembly and for answering questions. You promised to come for 2 hours, and you have extended that time and spoken for over 2 hours. You've laid down a challenge for us on defence expenditure. It's something which the Economics Committee in particular needs to take away, but it's something which affects us all in all parts of the Assembly. And I know we need to focus on it in our coming meetings. Before we break for coffee, I need to tell you that in accordance with our rules, the Standing Committee has ratified the appointment of Mr. Ojas Kalnins of Latvia to serve the remainder of the mandate as Vice President of the Assembly of Mr. Daniel Bakelane of Belgium, who gave up the office on being appointed Minister of Pensions in the Belgian government. And Mr. Kalnins will take the chair after the coffee break, which requires you to be back here in your seats promptly at 5 minutes before 12. You can go for coffee now. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay.
That's great. And you are...